A recent in-depth analysis of the origins of a novel coronavirus by investigative reporters at Epoch Times clinically and forensically validates the claim that the pandemic pathogen COVID-19 that has wreaked havoc on lives and human cost beyond the devastation to financial markets worldwide was neither a natural nor random occurrence, but rather a deliberately developed biological agent to be deployed in total warfare by the communist regime in the Republic of China, who since the 2003 SARS outbreak in Hong Kong had been openly the subject of heated debates appearing in clinical research papers with regard to their determination to develop a weapons-grade biological agent that, equipped with a breaching spike to enable the viral agent to penetrate deeply into a human cell for maximum damage, and enhanced with the HIV virus to degrade the natural defenses of a human immune system, could, perfect in its imperfections, be tactically and strategically deployed in a eugenicist model to create mass fatalities amongst the world's most vulnerable population, the sick and the elderly, which of record it has successfully and efficiently accomplished, with over 116,000 fatalities worldwide and over 22,000 nationwide to date. The Epoch Times investigative report, completed by Joshua Phillips, depicts the ability of this unique pandemic pathogen to have been able to defy probability, not just in the creation of the perfect biological weapon, perfect in its imperfections for a design to target the world's most vulnerable populations, but also one with nearly an identical genomic and nucleic acid profile of the SARS virus that emerged in a species of bats in the vicinity of Hong Kong in 2003. And this in-depth forensic analysis of the clinical development path overlaps and intersects with research conducted locally on information readily available in the open source by Major Mike Webb, a retired Army intelligence officer and trained analyst with assignments in special operations and strategic counterintelligence, and over 2 decades of experience working in force projection and force protection. Webb's research was triggered by a deviant pattern discovered early in the spread of the public health emergency of international concern that appeared buried in the raw data research published by the World Health Organization on January 23, 2020, 1 week before it alerted the world to a potential threat. At the time of the World Health Organization preliminary report, as confirmed by multiple sources, the Chinese government had isolated the origins of the coronavirus pathogen to a marketplace in the city of Wuhan in the Hubei province, the largest group of cities in the central mainland of China, around December 3rd, 2019, before alerting others in the world about their finding on December 31st, a claim of origin that is refuted flatly by the Epoch Times and other credible sources, and from which the Chinese government is only now beginning to retract. Neither their patient zero or first infected victim, nor the species of bat alleged to be the source of the community infection were found to have any connection to the marketplace, and in the case of the bat species, no connection at all to that region of China, making it highly unlikely that a pathogen with no airborne capability could have been so utterly devastating from that source location, even assuming a model of infection upon which the common man may believe is the way that an infectious contagion is communicated, because the virus had no logical path by which to arrive at that location in such critical mass to have commenced the endemic sequence. Moreover, according to the Epoch Times, the Chinese government completely ignored over 1/3 of the cases that clearly demonstrated that there had to be at least one other additional source. With almost an hour of testimony by experts in virology and epidemiology, the Epoch Times presents evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the communist government in China had been developing a weapons-grade biological agent consistent with its doctrine of total war, and provides clear and convincing evidence that, at least by accident in gross negligence, the Chinese government permitted this deadly weapon to escape, wreaking the havoc now being faced by the nations of the world. However, Webb's independent research from data readily available in the open source strongly suggests that not only was a biological agent perfect in its imperfections permitted to escape, but which then proceeded to deploy throughout the world, not based upon the predictable epidemiological paths of a biological agent, which relies upon the travel patterns and natural barriers imposed upon their host carriers, but rather in an evasive pattern consistent with tactical and strategic considerations, as found in a military engagement. A suggestion which repeated attempts by the Chinese government to deny or withhold from disclosure only served to validate as credible intelligence against a government whose claims with regard to success in containing a pandemic to only one province in a nation of over 1 billion people in less than a month do not serve to build confidence in the resolve to assist in the defeat of this world crisis in peaceful cooperation with other nations. The veritable smoking gun that triggered Major Mike Webb's curiosity was a predictive modeling report published on January 20th, 2020, upon which the World Health Organization had relied and included as the last footnote in its preliminary report on January 23rd, at which time the pandemic pathogen had already proliferated to devastating effect in the nation of South Korea, an avowed enemy of the communist government in China, jumping completely over the nation of North Korea, its ally, and nearest in proximity, but also spreading its reach to the nation of Iran, already in unrest consequent to the downing of the Ukrainian airliner, but also, since 2016, a trade partner of the Republic of South Korea. At least a curious coincidence in finding at least those two nations in the path of a novel coronavirus that was about to be announced as a public health emergency of international concern. But that report, relying upon the rationally based assumption that a biological agent relying upon the travel patterns of its carrier host would, more likely than not, predictably deploy to other nations by air travel. They compiled raw data reporting the top 15 destinations of travelers departing from the Hubei province airport. And based upon a normalized random distribution curve, those researchers confidently concluded that the most devastating effects of the biological agent should have found their worst devastation in Hong Kong and Bangkok. But what is of most significance is that the exotic destinations of South Korea, Iran, and Italy, which were experiencing the blunt force of the novel coronavirus at the time, did not even appear on the top 15 list. Evidence about which both the researchers who prepared the analysis, as well as the World Health Organization, were fully aware at the time, having included the full research in their reports, but which they patently ignored, despite the fact that it early demonstrated that the pathogen was proceeding upon a proliferation path that was subject to other than random factors and indicative of either some other intervening natural factor or the presence of an intelligence capacity that no virus has ever been known to possess on its own. If the Chinese government had produced such an intelligent virus capable of independent tactical and strategic decisions, that alone would merit great concern, especially in consideration of the other enhanced capabilities the novel coronavirus, perfect in its imperfections, has already been confirmed forensically to possess. Major Mike Webb has noted that this deviant pattern of proliferation has continued in the spread of the infection in the United States, finding introduction to the United States on the West Coast by avoiding the most popular international airport destination in Los Angeles, finding the first infection in the state of Washington to devastating effect, and in avoidance of JFK International Airport in New York on the East Coast in preference for Logan International Airport in Boston, the same airport from which the 9/11 attacks began. Webb has also noted the socioeconomic deviation and proliferation from passengers more likely to be engaged in international travel during the winter and the current devastating effects in lower income communities in New York, like in New Rochelle, as well as in St. John Parish, Louisiana, almost 50 miles southeast of Baton Rouge. And on March 25th, 2020, having become aware of the report in preparation for litigation to challenge a public health emergency order issued by Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia on March 17th, Major Mike Webb immediately contacted authorities at the World Health Organization to provide an explanation as to why they not only ignored but also appeared to bury the contradictory findings upon which they had based their preliminary report, which was a predicate to their declaration of a public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, on January 31st. But to date, the World Health Organization has provided no reply. As a retired field-grade military officer with vast experience in strategic counterintelligence, on March 27th, Major Mike Webb provided a detailed intelligence assessment to Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, but he also has chosen to ignore that report. It is of note that Senator Warner potentially placed at risk the lives of over 33,000 Virginians who signed his candidate positions to appear on the ballot, an achievement about which he even celebrated publicly on March 13th, despite reports of the first case of infection in the Commonwealth of Virginia on February 28th, and the first incidence of infection in the nation reported in the state of Washington on January 12th. Immediately after his announcement, Senator Mark Warner ceremoniously canceled all future public campaign events and then began making public gestures to address concerns for victims of the novel coronavirus, which most recently culminated in his introduction to the Congress of the Natural Disaster and Emergency Ballot Act, which would grant voters a 45-day window for in-person voting for his re-election in November, as well as the ability for voters to submit their ballots by mail in a $10 million campaign, which he has yet to date, despite being one of the wealthiest members of Congress, contributed one reportable dime. No less alarming is the response of elected and appointed Democrat Party officials in Virginia, who had, while the crisis was developing, found the nation's chief priority focused upon the impeachment of the current president, and who did not choose to act against a public health emergency of international concern designated as such by the World Health Organization at the end of January until March 17th, exactly 10 days after a 2,000 participant parade marched down a main street of Alexandria, the Northern Virginia municipality in which the Virginia Department of Health claims that the first infection occurred on February 28th, about 1 week before the parade. Yet it is still yet tactically significant that despite the lackadaisical attitude of elected and appointed leaders, particularly in the city of Alexandria, a large suburban community located across the river from the nation's capital, a thriving metropolis, not unlike New York. That community has reported one of the lowest incidences of infection and absolutely no fatalities to the pandemic crisis that has caused the total lockdown of the entire state. A state where, since the first infection at the end of February, there have been less fatalities than a typical commercial jet airliner crash, but for which the governor has requested federal funds to mobilize the National Guard to assist in a state declaration of public health emergency, as well as targeted the faith community for repressive rules restraining their ability to the free exercise of a sincerely held faith belief, as guaranteed by the First Amendment, and effectively relegating their status to a non-essential entity, subordinate even to a public golf course, which is free to operate under the best judgments of its business owners. All facts which Major Mike Webb has raised in current legal action, but which the courts have thus far expressed great reluctance to decide in contravention of laws controlling a decision on emergency injunctive relief. Yet, in at least tragically ironic coincidence, acting at least in panicked response to a pandemic crisis, which has produced a spike, enhanced penetration deep across the interior of the continental United States in rapid proliferation, just like the virus in a cell. State governors, like the HIV additive on the novel coronavirus, have selfishly violated the triage protocols required in a biological crisis, diverting critical resources, like medical masks, required in parts of the nation requiring the most immediate care, and encouraging citizens to do the same, while also channeling the nation's most vulnerable, the poor and the elderly, into restrictive corridors subjected to lockdowns and stay-at-home orders, where they remain presenting ready soft targets for a novel coronavirus, perfect in its imperfection, to deploy smartly and introduce massive community infections to devastating effects, not just in apartments, but also in entire neighborhoods, just as has been demonstrated by community infections examined by national health authorities at the Centers for Disease Control aboard commercial ship liners. Moreover, in tragic consequence, American citizens, encouraged to focus only upon themselves, leaders have encouraged the natural flight in fear default response, creating a demand for testing at sacrifice of treatment of resources, rather than encouraging a communal ethos to rally around and defeat the threat to the nation and the American way of life. Democracy truly is at stake. But the ultimate question is not with regard to the who, the what, or the how, but the why. Might a totalitarian regime suddenly, swiftly, and decisively implement actions in a total war doctrine, in a seemingly preemptive attack against the world? And intelligence sources have indicated, at least since 2016, that an internal stability within the nation of China had been deteriorating, creating conditions similar to those that produced the fall of the former Soviet Union. And it is not unreasonable to contemplate that rather than resort to a default flight response, that totalitarian regime decided in desperation to fight to save its life. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.